This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Hope springs eternal. There's a lot of examples of that, I think, where you always have maybe a sliver, a glimmer, maybe a scintilla of hope. And sometimes it comes to fruition. I think many of us are surprised when that thing that we've, quote unquote, held out hope for materializes. Sometimes I believe it's providential. Sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time. But time is what we're going to talk about today. Because a lot of time has elapsed since the death of Ellen Greenberg. But during that time, there have been, to say that it's been a roller coaster ride for Joshua and Sandy Greenberg is an understatement. But hope does spring eternal. And we got news of that this week, and that's why I'd like to discuss it a bit. Today, we're going to talk about a decision that has recently come down in Pennsylvania just this past week regarding the death of Ellen Greenberg. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Hope has sprung forth in the Ellen Greenberg case that just this past week, the Supreme Court of the state, the Commonwealth, which I still have yet to figure out the difference between a Commonwealth and a state. I'm sure that'll come to fruition at some point in time. But the Commonwealth, the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has agreed to hear
right.
Ellen Greenberg's case. And I could not be, I don't know if the word happy is right. I'm thrilled for the Greenberg family, though, because, buddy, let me tell you something. You talk about being drugged through a keyhole.
Yeah.
These poor people, just over all these years, their precious daughter dead under just these super bizarre circumstances. And here they're going to have a hearing. Yeah.
And it's not about guilt or innocence. This hearing is about whether or not the parents have standing in court to represent their daughter and in how her death is ruled. See, when Ellen Greenberg died and the investigation into her death was ruled a homicide, it seemed like a foregone conclusion. You'll move forward with an investigation as a homicide. But that's not what happened at all. The police had their own idea of what happened, and it was based on the fact that her fiance, that Ellen Greenberg's fiance, Sam Goldberg, who was there when this all took place, he made the 911 phone call. He broke in the door. We'll get into this in a minute. But he did all these things, and he was there talking to police, and police believed they believed him because he was there, so to say. Yep. And the medical examiner or coroner ruled this death a homicide. The police said it was a suicide, and for some reason unknown to me, the death was changed from homicide to suicide. And that is what this is about all these years later. This happened in 2011, Joe. And here we are, 2024, and her parents, bless their hearts, what they've gone through. They've spent $500,000, and they're doing it because if it's a suicide, it's a suicide. If it's a homicide, then there's a killer running loose. Somebody is out of prison that should be in prison for the death of their daughter, and they can't seem to get anyone. Well, over the last several years, they've gotten plenty of people to believe. Anyone that looks at this case, I have yet to have anybody, Joe, tell me they believe it's a suicide. I haven't had one person that I know that has looked at this tell me they believe suicide. Not one.
Yeah, count me in that number.
Yeah,
just so our friends know, we've actually, we've done a previous episode, on body bags,
right,
about Ellen, and that goes back, I think, August of 2022,
2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago when that dropped. I can't tell you how many times I've been on television about it.
You and Nancy did a huge reenactment.
Yeah, we actually at Jacksonville State, we reconstructed or did a facsimile of Ellen's kitchen.
Actually, you know what, Joe? Let's do this very quickly. For those of you who are new and don't know this story, and I found this out in dealing with some of our coworkers on this case up in New York, where they just aren't familiar with it. They're not familiar with this case. And
right.
It boggles my mind how anybody could not. But you know what, friends? We all miss things. There are stories every day that I don't see, that you don't see. So here it is. Ellen Greenberg, 27 years old. She's a school teacher in Pennsylvania. She's engaged. 4 days earlier, she had sent out hold the date cards to her friends and family about their wedding date. She was excited about this. A blizzard was coming in to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia at that time. And so they had sent everybody home from work. Go home. Y'all get out of here.
Yep.
They didn't say y'all, but they said, get out. And so she does. Now, Ellen Greenberg leaves the school, and on her way home to the apartment she shares with Sam Goldberg, her fiance, she stops and fills up her tank of gas in her car. All right. So, and the reason I point that out is because of what transpired after this. On her way home, she gets gas. She goes to the apartment. They're hanging out, and Sam, around 4:45, says, I'm going to go work out. He goes down to the apartment complex gym to work out. When he returns, sometime between 5:15 and 5:30, he can't get in the door. The door is barred. Now, it's locked, but it also has a lock bar on the inside.
Yep. Just like a hotel room. So everybody knows it's one of those things that swings. It swings and then it latches on to the, it's got the little slot in the gate, I think is how it's referred to. And it hooks onto the other thing that's anchored on the door facing itself. So that's what he's faced with.
And so he can't get in.
Right.
And he sends text messages to Ellen, and he spends at least 22 minutes. There are other reports that say longer, texting, calling, trying to get her to answer the door. He even sends her an email. She won't do it. So he breaks the door down and gets in. And he finds her on the floor in the kitchen. She's got her butt on the floor, leaned up against the cabinets, and she's bloody.
Yep.
And he calls 911. Sam calls 911 in what to me seems a bit rehearsed, but he calls and says, I've found my fiance. She's on the floor bleeding. And they said, well, you need to do CPR, check to see if she's alive, do CPR. And he goes, oh, wait a minute. I can't. There's a knife in her chest. Knife still sticking in her chest, Joe.
Yep.
The 911 call from Goldberg starts at 6:33 p.m. By 6:40 p.m., medics have responded to the scene and have pronounced Ellie dead. There's no sign of an intruder, no sign of forced entry. The only sign of forced entry, of course, is her fiance breaking the door to get in. As they're looking over the scene, police are saying, well, here's the fiance who's giving us all the information. He's standing right here. He's not leaving. And the police say, well, it's suicide. Now they're looking at, they haven't examined the body other than a cursory look. I have a question for you about what police do on the scene, Joe. But her body is then taken to the morgue. And the next morning, an autopsy is performed. The police are thinking suicide. And the next morning, when the ME starts doing the autopsy, they realize there are a whole lot of other things going on once they get the blood cleaned off and they're looking. And they realize, they being the medical people, but the coroner is saying there are 20 stab wounds on this woman's body. And at least 10 of them are in her back and neck.
Yeah.
This is a suicide, Joe?
Yeah.
And so the coroner actually says homicide. He rules it a homicide. And makes sense, doesn't it? Based on the number of wounds. However, the family is going through the grief process. It's a homicide. Got a murderer out on the loose. Family says, Sam's been a good boyfriend. We don't see anything wrong with him at first. The coroner does mention something, Joe. There are at least 10 other wounds on her body, bruises, that are in various stages of healing. Some are older than others, but she's got bruises on her legs, on her abdomen. She got bruises, buddy, and she doesn't play she's a girly girl, doesn't play any sports. So there's no reason for her to have bruises on her body. Maybe 1 or 2, we can all have those, but 10 that are in various stages of healing. Ruled a homicide, family grieving, months go by, and the coroner, unbeknownst to the family, decides it's not a homicide, it's a suicide. And changes the death ruling. Yep,
changes it. And here's the other piece to this, Dave, is that the family, according to what we understand, was not advised that this was going to happen. And so, here it starts, I think, when you have a dead child and, looking at this from the perspective of a parent, you've already got enough to kind of juggle, and you set your mind, when we tell a family member, first off, we notify them of death, or we give them that initial finding. They only hear about 10% of what you say in those critical early moments, and that's a proven fact. They literally have to come back to you and get more information because their brain can only take on so much. So when they have been, I'm sorry?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That makes sense though, Joe.
Well, you're getting slapped around emotionally at the core of your being. And I think that anybody, and we just have these fantastic listeners that everybody has their different life experiences. For our listeners that have experienced death in their life, you remember where you were when you found out. You remember who told you about a death of someone that was very dear to you. And you remember those initial comments that were made. And so when you're being told as a process, during this process, that this is a homicide, and that's kind of emblazoned into your brain. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to put full stop and go in reverse, and you don't even have the damn common courtesy. Let that just kind of sink in. The common courtesy to reach out to mom and daddy and say, we're changing this ruling and we're going to make it a suicide. You're right. I'd be fit to be tied. I mean, if you want to explain it to me, if you want to explain this finding to me, man to man, as a daddy, that you're changing my baby girl's cause of death, or manner of death rather, and that's the important thing here, the manner, from a homicide to a suicide, explain it to me, lay it out to me, tell me what's going on. But that's not done in this case. And so it's not only that Ellen is gone from them forever and ever. Amen. It's the fact that it was done in this manner. So you talk about throwing gasoline on a fire. That's what the Greenbergs have been dealing with for all these years, Dave. All these years. We're talking about going back to 2011. Okay.
Yeah.
This has been a long, long, crooked road for them along the way. But the one thing about it is this, and this just encourages me and should encourage many of you out there. They didn't sit down in a corner somewhere, wringing their hands, weeping. They got busy. And now maybe it's going to pay a dividend.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You'd mentioned, David, some time ago that Nancy and I had done a recreation of Ellen's apartment at Jacksonville State, and it appeared on Fox at that time.
It was a phenomenal recreation of the scene, Joe.
Yeah, that goes to our staff at JSU. I just showed up after, even our departmental secretary can, which is pretty amazing. She actually makes fake blood.
Wow.
And so we were able to, through acrylics and all these sorts of things, we were able to reconstruct, the scene, and, we had cabinetry in there and all that sort of thing.
We know how many stab wounds there were, Joe, but when the police showed up, because of the 911 call, you got medics and police showing up. There's something I want to point out. When Samuel Goldberg was trying to get Ellen to open the door, again, the door was locked with the latch, as we mentioned earlier, so he couldn't get in. And he was texting her and trying to call her and what have you. And here's what he was texting, Joe. I pulled this up because I want to give you an idea of this couple who 4 days earlier sent out save the date message, notes to all their friends and family. First message to her, first text, hello. Remember, he's standing outside the door. She's allegedly inside.
Mm-hmm.
Open the door. That's the second one. Third one. What are you doing? Fourth one. I'm getting pissed. 5. Hello. 6. You better have an excuse. So the sixth text is a threat. 7. What the F? 8. A-H-H-H. 9. You have no idea. Those are the text messages he sent to Ellen Greenberg, his fiancée. He went down to the gym to work out, comes back 30 minutes or so later, can't get in, and that's what he's texting her. She could be taking a shower. She could have fallen asleep. Any number of things could have been going on that do not require a threat by the sixth text message or a threat that I'm getting mad. So just letting you know, that's where Samuel Goldberg's head was in terms of sending these text messages. And now that we know that she's dead inside the apartment, Joe, he thought these were perfectly acceptable for police to see. He thought these messages were acceptable.
Yeah, and it's always that piece of it has always been interesting to me that he's there physically texting these messages to her, and there is no response whatsoever. And you see this kind of progressive escalation, which I guess that's kind of repetitive. You see this escalation with these text messages. Yeah. But when he finally gains entry into the apartment, and if I'm not mistaken, there was actually a building worker that had been there. Right. And then, he has to defeat that gate on the door because it's locked internally. You have to defeat it. And he was able, according to the police, to defeat that through pressure and being able to go in and then view, Ellen in the kitchen, and she's in a seated position as her buttocks is contacting the floor, legs, and they use the term splayed, which means they're extended and kind of off in these acute angles. Yeah. And she's leaning, listing to one side. I think one of the big questions is here, comes down to gravity. Right. We've got blood that is issuing from her face, and it is running so that it would be parallel with her shoulders. Okay, this blood streak, if you will. Well, you can't be seated in a vertical orientation, straight up and down, and blood is going to flow to the back of your head. So one of the suppositions was that she had been moved from maybe a position where she is lying on the floor in a supine position, which means that her shoulder blades are contacting the floor, and then moved and repositioned. And during that period of time when she was moved, the blood ran essentially downward, and then the orientation is changed at that point in time. I think that's kind of an interesting finding there.
If you're sitting up, the blood would drip down your face into your neck and chest, not to the side in your ear, Joe.
Yeah, and you would have it streak down, your shirt and this sort of thing. And look, there's blood deposition on her. You can't get past that because of the level of violence here. And when I say violence, Dave, I'm talking about so many stab wounds. These and they're not. And here's another one that I don't think that people really have focused on. She's actually got a pretty nasty incised wound on her scalp as well. That's kind of elliptical in shape. If you think about,
hold on one sec, Joe.
Yeah.
Let me back up very quickly here because I want you to be able to get into all of the injuries.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to when police come in, what they're seeing. I went to the 911 call, and you've got Samuel is on the phone with 911. By the way, he comes in allegedly and finds his fiance on the floor like this. He doesn't call 911 right away, Joe. He actually makes 2 other phone calls before calling 911. Sam Goldwyn, his wife, or his fiance, bloodied on the floor in the kitchen. He calls 2 lawyers. One is his uncle, one is his cousin. He calls 2 lawyers, Joe, before calling 911. I know lawyers. I know you. And if I come home and find a loved one in the kitchen like this, I ain't calling you.
No.
I'm calling 911.
Right. Yeah, I want them out there now. Expeditiously.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what the setting. That is where my head is in this, that he calls his uncle, a lawyer, and all I can think of is he's going, hey, man, you need a defense attorney, and your cousin is a lot better at this than I am. Call him and see what he thinks. That's all I'm thinking. And by the way, I am making that up out of my brain, what I think happened in the conversations. But the conversations took place. First, called his uncle the lawyer, then called his cousin the lawyer, then calls 911. And in the 911 call, he's acting very agitated and over the top. And the operator tells him a couple of times, you got to get yourself calmed down, man. You have to calm. That's what she actually says. Sir, you have to calm yourself down in order to get you some help. Now, the operator says, you don't know where she's bleeding from. Can't tell where the blood's coming from? Sam Goldberg says, I think her head, it's all about everywhere. It's everywhere. You think she might have fallen? Do you know what happened? Sam Goldberg says, she may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple. So she hit her head, Joe. Now, the fact that she has 20 knife wounds, and he comes up with, she hit her head. I'm thinking, is he looking at the same person, or are all of these wounds not bleeding?
No, they're not necessarily bleeding, and you have to kind of measure that out relative to the amount of hemorrhage that's there. And is there evidence that any of this stuff is post-mortem? And I think that there have been some people that have concluded that it could have been, an absence of hemorrhage in particular wound tracks. But I think probably the most glaring thing to me, Dave, is that he's looking down, and you had mentioned this earlier, when he's being told to render aid, CPR, and he states that she's got a knife in her chest. You couple that with what you just said about, I can't make sense of where and this is me paraphrasing, where the blood is coming from. Mm-hmm. This is what we call a clue. If you have a knife, which the knife is roughly
12.5 centimeters.
Yeah, and that's going to convert to about four. Hang on, let me do the math real quick. 4.9 inches. So this thing is buried in her chest. It's there, and this you have to know that this is going to be the last location, the coup de grace, if you will, of where the knife is going to wind up, and it really. It's done tremendous amount of internal damage. We're talking about a lung getting clipped. We're talking about a damage to the aorta, which even, and I've used this analogy relative to other cases that we've talked about. Anytime involving the aorta, even if you have let's just say she was rolling into an emergency room, and you had a cardiothoracic surgeon that was standing right there with a team. Mm-hmm. That is such a hill to climb for them to even fix her at that point in time. That's a lethal event. I've reflectively, have people over the years now, and it has been years, since we've been covering this case. They've said, Morgan, have you ever had, cases of self-inflicted, stab wounds? Yeah, I have. And most of them are precipitated in cases where people are they're in psychological duress, obviously. And I had one case in particular where the guy was literally psychotic, highly paranoid. I think I may have mentioned this in the first episode that we did about Ellen's case, but he thought that the CIA had put a listening device in his forearm, and he cut his forearm open. I think we found, let me get this straight. It seems like he had sliced his arm. If you'll turn your palm up on your left hand, he had sliced from the heel of his hand to what's referred to as the antecubital fossa, which is the fancy term for the crook of your arm. He had sliced that over 25 times with a fillet knife, trying to find the microphone in his forearm, and he bled out.
He was committed to finding it, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a young man that lived with his parents. He was paranoid schiz. He had no other stab injuries, but he thought he was being listened to. And so he's in this kind of psychotic phase. Oh. I had trouble ruling that, and it wasn't up to me to rule that. That was for the coroner. This was in New Orleans at the time, ruling that actually as a suicide. But he did die at his own hand. And one of the big things that you do with suicide is one of the things that forensic pathologists want is they want to be able to demonstrate intent when it comes to suicidal ideation and then acting that out. And you look at him and he's in a psychotic phase. You think, well, could he form intent in order to do that? Was it his intention to kill himself? Well, I don't know, but he brought about his own death. In Ellen's case, this thing starts off as a homicide with multiple stab wounds. And I got to tell you, Dave, just so you know, if I see this, look, if I've got 5 stab wounds on a case, I'm calling that overkill. We're not talking about 5.
Right.
We've got 20. We've got 20, not to mention the other little insults over the body. She's got a big kind of crescent-shaped, incised injury on her scalp.
When you say incised, what does that mean?
It's real simple. It's like it's a cut as opposed to a stab. So a stab, and these stab wounds range. Some of them are very superficial. But yet you have these that have depth, particularly the one that's where the knife is found buried in her chest, that has significant depth where it's impacting, her organs and the function of her aorta and her lung.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
If someone did intend to do great bodily harm to themselves, in other words, kill themselves, why would you be layered up? You would want to make sure that the blow that you struck was going to be effective, that it was, in fact, going to end your life. Well, is that the case here? Well, no, we've got, you're going through multiple layers of clothing here. You've got this knife that's buried in the chest. And the one thing that none of us can get past is this idea that you can stab yourself in the back. There's, that's one of the reasons that, you go back to even we did the episode on body bags about, the death of Julius Caesar. And that's where the term backstabber comes from, because, who's going to stab themselves in the back with a knife at their own hand? How can you even tolerate that kind of pain, that intense pain? Also, additionally, one of these insults, there's 2 of them actually, that one brushes the spinal cord, and you've got another one that enters into the base of the skull, and so you have indwelling hemorrhage there. There are, I think, neuropathologists out there that hold that Ellen, that is, this would have incapacitated her, but yet you look at the autopsy report, and there's a very specific mention in the autopsy report where the pathologist is saying, no, that was not the case, that this could not have incapacitated her. Well, how do you measure that relative to that? I've always had a problem with that. And not to mention, there was also this thing that had erupted early on. There's this lady that's, well-known, revered neuropathologist.
Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams.
Yeah, and when you talk about a pioneering lady that's in the field, and it's a very specific field of neuropathology. She is held as the gold standard. And the thing about her is that the ME's office had claimed at that particular time that they had sent Ellen samples, perhaps the brain, to this physician, this renowned physician, for her to examine and give an opinion. Guess what? She says that she has no record of this, Dave. Out of all the people in the world that you could have chosen to do this, I think that she would be, like I said, she's the gold standard. She's somebody that you would want to have eyes on this case. But to say that you had actually sent the sample to her, and she says, and she keeps meticulous notes because they bill for everything they do.
I was going to say, she's a contractor, and this is not a first go around, but here's what actually happened. She didn't say she never saw it. She said that she has no recollection. She did not examine it. There's no record. She never sent a bill. There's nothing. But here's what actually transpired. To change this from homicide to suicide and back that up, they had to make so that this wound on the spinal cord did not affect the spinal cord itself, that it actually didn't impact it. Because if the spinal cord is impacted, she cannot have inflicted the last stab wound, which is the knife to the chest.
Particularly at that level.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't impact the spinal cord, then she could. This is what the entire homicide-suicide comes down to. And this major issue, the doctor or the coroner, the ME, in a pouring down snow in Philadelphia, takes this section of spinal cord, the specimen, to Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams, and outside of the hospital, standing next to her car in a snowstorm, she looks at it. Not under a microscope, not in a lab, in the parking lot next to her car. That's the examination that took place that led the ME to state that this expert, world-renowned expert, said there was no impact on the spinal cord. Of course, she said, I might have looked at it, but I did not examine it.
Yeah, and this is not something, when you conduct any kind of examination, and this applies both in medicine and forensics, this stuff is so highly and intensely documented, and it's step by step, and there are procedures that have to take place in order for it to be validated. Dave, let me ask you this question, just knowing what you know. If I were of a mind to try to take this so-called examination that you're referring to and try to submit that into court and have that be valid, I can tell you, our friend Nancy Grace would rip that to shreds. I don't know of a judge that would allow it.
Even when you have the doctor saying, I don't know what you're really talking about. I did not examine this. I have no record of it. I have nothing. So no, but that's where this hinges, Joe. This entire case for these parents, all I can think of is, Ellen Greenberg's dad is a doctor. They spent $500,000 trying to get it changed from suicide to they're willing to settle for
undetermined.
Undetermined.
Yeah.
It's not a suicide. That's all they're trying. It's not a suicide. Friends, somebody did this to her. She didn't do it to herself. One quick thing. You mentioned the number of stab wounds.
Yes.
I read a piece on this because I was curious, talking about how when people do use a knife to inflict, that sometimes there are extra wounds, not just a kill strike or what have you. And that sometimes it's the individual is testing the water, see how bad it's going to hurt and what have you. Yeah. But those cuts are substantially different than what we're talking about here in this particular case, where you have wounds to the back, the neck, and the chest.
Yeah, I can't imagine under any circumstances that they would be in such a broad anatomical orientation where you would have them both posteriorly and anteriorly. That doesn't make sense. And I know what you're saying. And this happens actually, this translates really well into other suicide investigations because you know how you use the term testing the waters? There is many documented cases where people will literally test fire weapons before they shoot themselves. It's part of what is done. And you go to this idea, just, if they're using a handgun, say for instance, they'll test fire the weapon maybe up into the ceiling. I've had them people will have heard a gunshot wound out of a window, perhaps. I actually interviewed someone one time where they saw a man who did eventually take his life. So I got involved in the case. Was in a second story window and extended the weapon out of the window. And this was actually witnessed and fired it into the street and sat back down and shot himself. They just want to make sure that it's not really a fail safe, but to make sure that it's functioning.
Wow.
That's a bit tougher to do with a knife. But if you are going to do a test run, you would think that it would be concentrated in one specific area where you're going to do this. And there's any number of ways that people do kill themselves with sharp instruments. We've heard for years people, the old cutting their own wrist. Mm-hmm. I have had people that have cut their own throats. I have colleagues that have worked a lot of those over the years, particularly used to get them a lot with straight razors. Mm-hmm. But the idea that someone stabs himself multiple times, and the thing that you have to think about physiologically, right, are these pain centers firing. And I think all of our friends out there that are listening, if you even think about sustaining a paper cut, and I know I'm not trying to diminish Ellen, but it hurts so incredibly bad. Can you imagine driving a metal object into your body 20 times? You do it over and over and over again. I'm sorry, folks. Something just does not add up. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.